Hey everybody, this is Carl. Welcome back to my dark anthology. Today we're starting something a little bit different. We're starting a series. And yeah, I know I've started a series before. You have Darkwater and then you have The Mists of Melberk. Those were all decided to be made series after I already wrote the first episodes. It was kind of after the fact. This, however, this is a project that has actually been in my head since when I lived in Savannah, which was in the late 90s. The series is called The Veiled Tapestry. Book one is Threads in the Dark, and this is going to be the first chapter or episode, A Dark Beginning. And I hope you enjoy it.
The morning sun cast long shadows through Savannah's Spanish moss as James Gray unlocked his shop. The brass bell above the door chimed softly, stirring dust motes in the golden light. Gray's Oddities and Antiquities read the hand-painted sign, its edges weathered by years of coastal Georgia weather. Inside, centuries of history lined the shelves, Civil War medals nestled beside Victorian music boxes, Native American dream catchers hung over leather-bound books. Each item had a story, and James knew them all. More importantly, he knew which objects needed to stay safely hidden in the back room, away from curious eyes. The bell chimed again. "Mr. Gray?" Sarah Martinez stood in the doorway, her young son Miguel clutching her hand. "I'm sorry to come so early, but Miguel's nightmares are getting worse." James smiled warmly, coming around the counter. He knelt to Miguel's level, noting the dark circles under the boy's eyes. "Still seeing the shadow man, amigo?" Miguel nodded, pressing closer to his mother. "Let's see what we can do about that." James disappeared into the back room, returning with a small leather pouch. "Dream sage," he explained to Sarah. "Burn a pinch before bedtime. The good dreams will find him." Sarah reached for her wallet, but James waved her off. "Just bring me some of your tamales next time you make them. Deal?" Miguel's face brightened. "Mama makes the best tamales." As they left, James watched them through the window, remembering when his nephew John was that age. The boy had been plagued by similar nightmares after his mother left. Sometimes James wondered if that early brush with darkness had drawn John to him, the way trouble seemed to draw people to his shop. The morning passed in a comfortable rhythm of customers and conversations. Old Mrs. Wong came in looking for a replacement teapot, swearing her old one was cursed. James found her a delicate bone china piece that somehow made the perfect cup every time. He didn't mention the blessing he'd placed on it. Some things were better left unsaid. His phone buzzed as Mrs. Wong left. James checked the caller ID and stepped into the back room before answering. "Jude," he said quietly, "tell me you have good news." The response made him frown. James ran a hand through his graying hair, tension creeping into his shoulders. "No, don't do anything yet. Let me look into it first." He paused, listening. "I know it's dangerous, but we need to be sure. Just keep an eye on things until I contact you." He ended the call and stood for a moment in the dim back room, surrounded by objects too dangerous for public display. Something was stirring in Savannah, something that made the darker artifacts hum with malevolent energy. He'd have to be careful. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully, though James couldn't shake the unease from Jude's call. As twilight approached, he began his closing routine, methodically checking the locks and security system. He paused at certain items, making small adjustments to their positions with practiced care, as if their placement held special significance. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Urgent. Meet at St. John's Cemetery. Midnight. Come alone." At the bottom was a simple mark he recognized, his informant's signature. Still, something felt off. He texted back, "Confirm identity?" The response came immediately. "The ravens are restless." The correct response, but James's unease grew stronger. He glanced at his watch, 8:47 p.m. Enough time to prepare, but... James hesitated, then sent a quick text to Jude. "Meeting contact at St. John's. Midnight. If you don't hear from me by 1 a.m. ... He left the message unfinished, knowing Jude would understand. James made his final rounds through the shop, his movements deliberate and practiced. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every nerve ending screamed that something was wrong. Still, information from this particular source had proven invaluable in the past. He couldn't afford to ignore it. He pulled on his worn leather jacket, the weight of it comforting and familiar. In one pocket, he felt the reassuring shape of a small notebook, its pages filled with contacts and observations gathered over decades. The other pocket held his phone and a small flashlight, simple tools for what should be a simple meeting. The streets of Savannah were quiet as James locked up the shop. Spanish moss swayed in the gentle evening breeze, casting strange shadows under the streetlights. The air held that peculiar thickness unique to Georgia nights, heavy with humidity and the whispered stories of the Old South. James headed towards St. John's Cemetery. The historic graveyard was a tourist attraction by day, but at night it transformed into something else entirely, a maze of shadows and stone monuments to the dead. His footsteps echoed off the cobblestones as he walked, each sound seeming to carry further than it should in the still night air. A cat darted across his path, making him jerk. James chuckled at his own nervousness, but the laugh died in his throat as he noticed something odd. All the usual night sounds had stopped. No crickets chirped, no distant traffic hummed. The silence pressed against his ears like a physical thing. As he approached the cemetery gates, movement caught his eye. A figure stepped out of the shadows, then another. Before James could react, a sharp pain exploded at the base of his skull. The world tilted sideways, cobblestones rushing up to meet him. His last conscious thought was of John, and hoping that he was ready. When James regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the cold. Not the gentle cool of a Savannah evening, but a bone-deep chill that spoke of darker things. The air was thick with the musty scent of decay and abandonment. He tried to move, only to find himself bound tightly to a chair. As his vision cleared, James took in his surroundings. He was in what appeared to be an old mansion, its former grandeur long since faded to ruin. Moonlight filtered through cracked windows, casting strange shadows on walls where wallpaper peeled away in long, ragged strips. He recognized this place, Henderson Manor, the infamous Kill House, though few knew it by that name. The police had investigated disappearances in this area before, but the truth about this place remained hidden from official reports. Only those who dealt in Savannah's darker secrets knew what really happened within these walls. The thought sent a chill down James's spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. But before he could process the implications of his location, a door creaked open. A tall figure stepped into the moonlight, his movements carrying an unnatural grace. Behind him, others emerged from the shadows, their forms seeming to blur at the edges. The leader approached James, each step deliberate and measured, like a predator savoring the moment. "James Gray," the man's voice was cultured, almost pleasant, the keeper of secrets, the protector of Savannah's delicate balance. His lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was nothing human in the expression. "Your reputation precedes you. For decades, you've played your part in this charade, maintaining the illusion that keeps the cattle sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of the true nature of their world." The leader circled James's chair, each step precise, measured. "But times are changing, Mr. Gray. The old ways, the careful balance you and your kind have maintained, they're becoming obsolete. We grow tired of living in shadows, of pretending to be less than what we are." He paused behind James, leaning close enough that his cold aura raised goosebumps on James's neck. "The urn you stole holds the key to reshaping this city in our image. No more hiding, no more compromise." James tested his bonds, finding them expertly tied. The ropes bit into his wrists, the pain helping him focus. "I assume this isn't a social call?" "Oh, but it is," the leader smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the moonlight. "Consider this a changing of the guard. Your time as Savannah's protector is ending, but first—" His hand shot out, gripping James's shoulder with inhuman strength. "You're going to tell us where you hid the urn." What followed was a masterclass in pain. They started with his fingers, breaking each one methodically while their leader continued his monologue. The snap of bones echoed through the room like dry twigs breaking, each crack followed by the wet sound of splintered bone piercing flesh. James's world narrowed to white-hot points of agony, the taste of copper flooding his mouth as he bit through his own tongue, trying to hold back screams. "You see, Mr. Gray, pain is an art form, one my kind has perfected over centuries. Another finger broke, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet room. The leader bent the digit backwards until the skin split, revealing pale bone through torn flesh. The human body is remarkably resilient, yet so fragile. The trick is finding the perfect balance between agony and consciousness. They worked their way up his arms, alternating between breaks and cuts. Blood dripped onto the floor in a steady rhythm, joining darker stains from previous victims. Cold sweat soaked through James's clothes, the chill making him shiver, even as fever from his wounds burned through him. His vision swam, darkness creeping at the edges, but they never let him fade completely. Each time consciousness began to slip away, they would bring him back with calculated precision, ensuring he felt every moment. The leader never stopped talking, his voice remaining cultured and calm despite the brutality of his actions. James's shoulder joint popped from its socket with a wet, tearing sound that seemed to echo off the walls. The pain was extraordinary, drawing an involuntary scream that tasted of blood and bile. "I've existed long enough to see empires rise and fall, Mr. Gray. I've watched countless guardians like yourself break, watched their noble principles crumble in the face of true suffering. Your kind always believes you're different, that your cause makes you stronger. But in the end..." He twisted James's shattered arm, grinding the splintered bones together, drawing a hoarse scream that barely sounded human. "Everyone breaks, everyone talks. The only variable is how long it takes." Hours passed, marked by James's ragged breathing and the steady drip of blood. His tormentors worked with surgical precision, each cut calculated to maximize pain while minimizing blood loss. The leader occasionally paused to study James's face, as if cataloging each expression of agony for future reference. The room spun lazily around James, his head lolling forward only to be yanked back by his hair, forcing him to stay present, to feel everything they inflicted. "Your resistance is admirable, but ultimately futile." The leader crouched before him, studying James's face with cold curiosity. "We have eternity to extract the truth. You have only minutes left of mortality. The choice is yours. Die in agony, knowing your sacrifice will mean nothing, or tell us what we want to know and embrace a quicker end." James lifted his head, meeting the leader's gaze despite the blood clouding his vision. In those inhuman eyes, he saw an ancient hunger, a darkness that had stalked the nights long before Savannah existed. The truth he'd spent decades protecting was about to cost him everything. "I buried it," James whispered, his voice rough from screaming. "I buried it where you'll never..." He coughed, spitting blood onto the floor. "Where you'll never dare to look." The leader's expression shifted, anticipation warring with suspicion. "Where?" "Their island," James managed, each word a struggle. "Tybee. I left it in a place you wouldn't dare go, no matter how desperate you are." The leader's face contorted into something monstrous, all pretense of humanity falling away. "It has played its final futile move in this game. Now it is ended." He turned to his followers, his voice cold with command. "Dispose of this worthless sack of flesh." As the shadows closed in around him, the last thing James Gray saw was the moonlight streaming through the broken windows of Henderson Manor, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him with hungry arms. Then the shadows took him, and James Gray's final secret died with him.